norm. It's not a norm, because what happened in South Armagh, what happened in East Belfast, that's not a 1-1 score draw, Stephen. That's a 2-0 defeat for decency.
Kenny Donaldson, thank you. One of those at the commemorations, the Loyalist Jamie Bryson. Good morning to you, Jamie.
Well, hold on. Let's just stop there before we go any further. For the last 3 weeks, you have consistently had Chris Donnelly on your show discussing IRA commemorations, and each and every time you have introduced Chris Donnelly as a commentator. He is a Republican.
Are you embarrassed to be a loyalist?
No.
Have you a problem with me calling you a loyalist?
No, sorry, just let me finish. He has been introduced in neutral terms as a commentator. He's a former Sinn Féin election candidate.
As I point out in interviews.
He is an ardent Republican, so I am a loyalist and I have no difficulty with that, but the BBC would be good to start applying some equality across the board. So if Chris Donnelly and all of the Republicans are going to be called commentators, then I want the same treatment, and vice versa.
I think you'll find that with Mr. Donnelly, we pointed out that he had stood as a Sinn Féin.
Well, the next time he'll be called a Republican commentator then.
Can we talk about the substantive point here? The substantive point,
well,
Jamie.
That is a substantive point, by the way.
Well, one of the other substantive points then was here you were criticising the commemoration for IRA people in South Armagh just last week. And here you are now at a commemoration for the UVF. What's the difference?
Well, let's make a couple of points and take that step by step. And I do say credit to Kenny Donaldson, because actually, unlike many so-called victims groups on the nationalist side, Kenny is consistent across the board, and he has his views, and he takes the same view of loyalism as he does of republicanism and those involved on both sides. So to Kenny's credit, at least he's consistent. Unlike some, I don't agree with everything he says, but
can we talk about you? You're at a commemoration, having criticised commemorations for the IRA. You're at commemorations for the UVF.
Well, let's make.
Is that the definition of hypocrisy?
Well, let's make a couple of points on that. The first thing is one of the key issues around the South Armagh promotion of terrorism was that Sinn Féin have taken on the mantle and purport to be now for all. They're trying to mislead people that they represent all, that they're a party for all. Well, no, they're not.
Let's talk about you. Let's talk about you. Why would you want to commemorate the terrorist UVF organisation?
Let me finish. I don't purport, unlike Sinn Féin, to be for all. I am a loyalist and I'm a unionist, and I have a very.
Are you a UVF supporter?
No, I'm not a UVF. UVF is a prescribed organisation.
Do you support the UVF?
I am. No, look, Stephen, I'm not. I have had this with you for years and years.
But you've been at a commemoration for a UVF individual.
I'm going to make another point to you, Stephen. In the 3 weeks that the Stephen Nolan show turned into the Chris Donnelly show, not once did you ask him was he an IRA supporter. Now, why the differential standards? And I am sick, sore and tired of not only me, but everybody.
Because I didn't see Mr. Donnelly at the commemoration.
Unionism and loyalism is consistently held by the BBC and by this show to a different standard, and enough is enough. Long ago,
Jimmy, the distraction tactics are not going to take away from the question. Okay, why would you want to be at a commemoration for a member of the UVF? Why?
The first thing is this. I have attended that commemoration for many years. The legacy of the conflict is a very difficult and complex issue, and people have complex views on it. It's particularly complex and difficult, actually, for those of my generation who don't have the lived experience, the lived trauma of having lived through it.
Did you know Robert Seymour?
Well, plainly not, because he died before I was born, so evidently.
So why would you be there? If it wasn't to support what the UVF did, why were you there? Can you make that clear?
There's many people who take the view that loyalists in a conflict situation, which we're not in now, by the way, which we haven't been in for 25 years, but in a conflict situation, that loyalists, in the absence of the security forces being able to defend those communities, had a right to defend themselves. And I have said that repeatedly over the years. Nothing shocking about this. Nothing new. It's the same view that I have held.
But you don't take the same view. But you don't take the same view of the IRA. When people want to commemorate people in the IRA, you don't take the same view.
I think the IRA were a murdering terrorist organisation who started the conflict, who fueled the conflict. And if the SAS,
killing innocent Catholics.
If the SAS and the British Army had been allowed what they should have been allowed to do, there'd never have been a need for any loyalist organisations. And by the way, let me say this. the killing of any innocent Catholic, Protestant, anybody else was wrong. Was totally wrong, unacceptable, and I do not endorse that in any shape or form. I would not want to see any innocent person lose their life. Let me finish. But I do take a different view in relation to those who purported to call themselves an army and purported to be fighting in a war, and then cried when anybody shot back at them.
Well, they're all terrorist organisations. They're all prescribed organisations.
That's correct.
We
want to get to a society when there's no prescribed organisations active, when everybody is committed to a
Are we not already at
society.
That stage?
No, we're not, because there's still ongoing paramilitary activity. There's still criminality. There's still there's significant problems across all communities, by the way, with drug dealing and coercion, and all of that must be brought to an end.
I want to ask you, I know that you took issue with the Sunday Life at the weekend because they photographed you beside Stephen Matthews. Maybe you can stay there and we'll come back and ask you about that in just a second.
Anna was part 14 NR, around 3 families, and a typical 2 year
last year. Back payments on
a short time ago when they faced.
Here's Angie.
Brighter with temperatures
that they're into Jamie Bryson unclaimed £1 million lotto prize from a ticket bought in County Antrim here in Northern Ireland. So someone's sitting on £1 million and they haven't claimed it. Must get my wee wallet out. Can you imagine how all of you would react if it was me? We're in the middle of talking to Jamie Bryson this morning. Mr. Bryson was very critical of the commemoration for the IRA last week, and yet he has attended himself a commemoration for an individual who was in the UVF. And you can see, Jamie, how people will be calling out the hypocrisy around that.
Do you know what I do find interesting, actually? And I was just thinking about this on the break. It's a lot of this is, by the way, driven by social media. But isn't it interesting that 9 times out of 10, social media and the headbangers on there are obsessed and wanting to be banned from the Nolan show, don't want me on. And all of a sudden I've spent yesterday and this morning demanding that I am on the show so as you can do this story. So it's interesting how much all of this is driven by social media. Look, sorry,
I do need to cut across you and then we'll get on into more interesting points. But let me assure you, the Nolan show is not driven by social media. There have been mass attempts. There have been coordinated political attempts to stop the Nolan show doing stories. We'll stand up to that to the day I die. We are not driven by social media. It just doesn't happen.
Well, we'll move on, as you said, more interesting points. Yes, the legacy of the conflict, and as I said, particularly for those of us who don't have the lived experience, thankfully, and the lived trauma of that is a complex area, and people take different views on that. We are a divided society, and look, I have a particular view of the conflict. I mean, it's a view I've articulated for over 10 years. Nobody should be shocked. Nobody should be surprised by it. Least of all the Sunday Life, whatever they get off and what they were trying to do. So I don't see what the story is here, what the interest is.
Well, part of
here.
the story is this.
What is the story?
When you are at a commemoration for a member of the UVF, do you see Robert Seymour as a soldier or a terrorist? And do you apply the same definition when you're describing what members of the IRA were?
Well, you see, look, and I'm happy to say this, and this is not a popular opinion, but here's the difference with me, and here's why I'm somehow sometimes treated as controversial. I'll just be honest about what I actually think. I won't try and sugarcoat it. So here's the truth. No, I don't apply the same standard to Loyalists as I do to the IRA. And as Peter Robinson said, who became
not Loyalists, not Loyalists, paramilitary members of a prescribed paramilitary
Stephen,
organisation.
I will say it clearly for you. And this is not a popular view. And this is not a view like Kenny Donaldson would hold, because to his credit he is consistent. But I'm inconsistent, and I'm honest about that. And the truth of the matter is, in my view, in a conflict situation, I view the IRA as terrorists. And as Peter Robinson said in the 1980s, who went on to be our First Minister, I viewed the actions of the UVF and UDA in a conflict situation as counter-terrorism, as responding to the IRA. And that's not a popular view.
I have never seen Peter Robinson say that.
Sorry. Peter Robinson in the 1980s said that he viewed the UDA as counter-terrorists. Yes.
I will go and try to find that.
Yes.
But
okay.
let's not talk about others. Let's talk about you.
Yes, and I've been very honest.
So when the UVF have gone out and shot people dead, innocent Catholics dead, you describe them as what?
Sorry, I have already said that no innocent person should have been targeted or killed.
When the UVF have murdered
conflict.
anyone, because they do not have the right to do so. Nobody had the right. Sorry, nobody had the right to kill or target anybody. And the UVF and the UDA should absolutely not. Are the UVF terrorists, Jimmy?
I think in a conflict situation they were counter-terrorists.
No, now are the UVF terrorists?
Well, the UVF is prescribed, but I actually think where the UVF and the UDA and need to get to now is to a place of civilianisation and a place of transition.
The question is, are the UVF terrorists?
Well, there is no ongoing national security conflict at the minute. So technically they're prescribed under the. No,
I'm not asking a technical question. In your view, are the UVF terrorists or not?
There is no ongoing conflict. If you go and read the Terrorism Act and read the definition of terrorism,
so the UVF are active.
Well, they're not active. Well, sorry, within the definition of the Terrorism Act, in terms of terrorism,
okay.
You see, terrorism is defined. Neither they nor the IRA are active in a terrorist capacity. And the UVF and the UDA need to get to the point of transitioning to a place of civilianisation, playing a positive role in society. And let me say this again emphatically, and so this is heard loud and clear. Drug dealing, criminality, extortion, coercion of communities is reprehensible. It is wrong. It doesn't represent loyalism. And there has to be an end to all of that.
All right. Look, the reason why this conversation between you and I is so important is because you are someone who schools yourself in law. You are someone, and I know this, who you're trying to use statute, you're trying to use legislation, you're trying to gen yourself up well beyond what the vast majority of people have of an understanding of law to try to achieve your political objectives. I get that. You're also someone who has a very deep understanding of what the DUP's thinking is, well beyond what most journalists know, who have contacts going back decades. So it's really important that we actually understand what you stand for in terms of if you're having meetings with Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, if you're close to the thinking of the DUP, if you're meeting whoever else it is that you're meeting. It's really important, actually.
It's important for me to make clear, very, very clearly, the DUP have always had a consistent view in relation to Loyalists and Republicans, and they've said that out consistently. That my views are not their views. Sir Geoffrey has been consistent. He's been consistent across the board. So let's not get into a situation of trying to transfer my views of a historical conflict on to other people who have set their
I'm
own
not
views
attempting to do that, but you're very much close to the thinking of the DUP.
I'm just cutting it off from the outset.
So
do not be transferring my views on to Sir Geoffrey or anybody else. They have set their own views out over many decades.
So, with regards to how you feel about the UVF, a prescribed organisation, and there are many, many people who are very interested in how close to the thinking of the UVF you are.
Stop. No. Stop. I'm going to deal with this here and now because I'm going to tell you something. You made an accusation like that against me a number of years ago, and it has been repeated and thrown at me again and again by people on social media and played back at me. And I'm going to, in fact, I think I already have sent you it. I'm going to send you it again. On the back of that allegation that you made against me, I went to court and obtained disclosure from the PSNI of all intelligence they held in relation to me, and they have no intelligence that I am nor have ever been linked to any prescribed organisation or any criminal activity. In fact, the only activity listed on that intelligence report handed to the court by the PSNI was that I had taken part in an unnotified public procession. So we're not going there again. I'm nailing this now.
Let me ask you this.
So if the BBC is going to make that allegation, make it, but there'll be trouble if they make it again.
So let me ask you this. The Sunday Life put I think it was front page, was it? That you took exception.
You think there's nothing else? You think there's nothing else going on in the world? But yes, man walks down the street, exclusive in the area in which he lives. Great journalism.
Well, you were Sunday Life printed a photograph of you with a man who is widely reported, Stephen Matthews, to be the leader of the UVF in East Belfast.
And he would deny that, emphatically. And I mean, here we have again.
So Stephen Matthews has never been associated with the UVF? Stephen Matthews?
Sorry, if you want to, I actually represent Mr. Matthews, so if you want to put questions to Stephen Matthews, send them to me and we'll get the answers. We're not answering them on the hoof. Mr. Matthews would deny any involvement in any criminal activity of any prescribed organisation, and he's no convictions in relation to any of that. But let me say this point. It's widely known. It's widely known by the Sunday Life because I represent Mr. Matthews. So they come to me when they're doing stories about Mr. Matthews and a range of others to offer him a right of reply and an opportunity to comment. So it's no surprise that I know Stephen Matthews. I mean, he assisted me in my football team.
I doubt you would have been giving Mr. Matthews legal advice at the commemoration. You were photographed at the commemoration for Robert Seymour, a UVF man.
Listen, there's no dispute that I was at that commemoration. Absolutely none. And I've been going to it for 10 years. Absolutely none. There's no dispute that not only is Mr. Matthews a client of mine, but in fact that Mr. Matthews is a friend of mine. No dispute in that at all. That is absolutely no secret. And I have no shame in that whatsoever. And I think Mr. Matthews is using any influence he has to drive a process of transition to ensure that loyalist communities...
What influence does he have?
...are freed. Well, he's somebody who is an ex-prisoner, and ex-prisoners in our community have influence.
What influence? Why does he have influence?
The same way as probably Spike Murray has influence. He's an ex-prisoner, and he's somebody in those working class communities people would look to as ex-prisoners and listen to.
So, Jimmy, let me ask you this.
No, I'm sorry, and let me finish this point. This is important because it's important to be fair to these people who are repeatedly demonised. Stephen Matthews has been instrumental during what was going on in relation to the protocol, in relation to anger. Stephen Matthews was one of the people talking to young loyalists and saying to them, I have been there, I have been in prison, you don't want to go back there, violence is not the way to go. So when people are constantly demonising that man and other loyalists, they should be aware of what's actually going on in the background.
And when Mr. Matthews is talking to those young loyalists, is he giving them any messages about drugs and drug taking? Does Stephen Matthews have a view on drugs in East Belfast and Belfast and the wider community in Northern Ireland?
Yes, he does. And I can emphatically stand over that because Mr. Matthews has been committed and clearly committed to using any influence he has as an ex-prisoner on a process of transition to put an end to people using the name of loyalism for drugs and for criminality.
What is Mr. Matthews' view on drugs?
Well, his view on drugs has been consistently set out in responses to numerous newspapers. He condemns the drugs trade, he finds it reprehensible, and he encourages young people not to get involved in it, not to be coerced in it. So don't believe everything you read in Sunday tabloids. And let me say this, since you brought up the Sunday Life story, I'm going to read a paragraph to you from the Sunday Life, and credit the Media House, they're a fantastic media organisation. In terms of transparency, they actually, unlike some, publish their editorial code on the internet. Clause 4, it is a basic tenet of good and responsible journalism to put any critical or damaging claim or allegation to the subject before publication. The Sunday Life made no effort to contact Mr. Matthews, made no effort to contact me before they put that story out on Sunday, which I don't even know what the story was. Man walks down the street in the area in which he lives, but that's for them. So the Sunday Life should apply to
the UVF commemoration.
The Sunday Life should apply.
Who criticised an IRA commemoration is then at a commemoration for the UVF. That's the story.
No, it's not the story, because I am very honest about
Okay.
the differential view which I take of legacy. I do not support. Kenny Donaldson.
Many people might argue it's called hypocrisy.
Well, it may well be, but I'll tell you this. Last week we had somebody, and you can go and look at the tweets, somebody who is consistently on platform by the BBC as a commentator, Andre Murphy.
Okay, no, we're not getting in. We're not getting in on a live radio program. We're not doing it this morning because we're here to talk with you, Jamie. But I think we've had quite a long discussion. I hope you think that you have been given an opportunity to air your views. That's Jamie Bryson this morning. As